Welcome to #Wednesdays Weekly, a weekly information session in collaboration with voluntary sector and public sector partners. Today, the session will explore how equal is Rochdale. Over 250 people from a range of backgrounds contributed to the original 3 Equality Assembly sessions from summer 2020 to spring 21. These sessions were hosted by Action Together with the help of Health Watch Rochdale and Rochdale Borough Council. The Equalities Assembly magazine is the result of all of this work, a snapshot of society in Rochdale Borough at the point of the COVID-19 pandemic, and what we can build on to make it more equal and where there is the most work still to do. Over to you, Robbie.
Thanks very much, Hayley, and thanks everyone for joining. So as Hayley's shared, today is about exploring this Equalities Assembly work, and in particular, this lovely newspaper that is now distributed around and about across Rochdale. So I'll just put a link to where you can take a look at it in the chat, online on Action Together's website, and also actually the locations that you can pick it up. So a lot of work went into producing this newspaper, with thanks to a number of people here who were involved in the interviews, a number of people I think who were probably involved in those original Equalities Assembly sessions, and also the Elephants team who were heavily involved in pulling the content together, doing the interviews that contributed to it, and indeed reviewing and putting the final words together with myself and Kerry Bertram, formerly of this parish, Action Together. It's hopefully a good recognition of kind of what everyone said and what everyone talked about, but obviously so much happened in that pandemic period around everything, not just equalities, that it would be absolutely impossible to capture everyone's voices. But what we were aiming for with this publication was a bit of a snapshot and an understanding of the things we saw. So some of the difficult things, some of the stuff that was exposed about inequalities in our communities, but also some of the positive things and the ways we responded to them and the ways we did things differently. And so the magazine is part of that recognition for us all to kind of remember that this is what we felt and this is what we thought about inequalities in that time, and not just reset back completely to normal, but also to highlight and draw on the stuff that was good and make a rallying call for us to do more of it, and us to keep that work going on. So there are a bunch of locations that you can pick these paper copies up from, not least the community warehouse who have a bunch of copies still remaining and can distribute through food pantries or food banks for anyone connecting to the community warehouse. Just email rochdale@actiontogether.org.uk if you want to connect and find out how to get to those. A bunch of the other locations I'm going to share because we put them on this this nice map. So just make sure my tech is working and I can get that for you. There you go. So you'll see some of the names that are on there include the Riverside Council building. I've got a bunch of copies. We distributed a load to children's centres. The Job Centre in Rochdale took some as well, and they've got it at the Reaching Out Centre in Drake Street, down at Lighthouse Project in Middleton, Recovery Republic, and some of the Thrive Cafe and a few others over in Hayward. So we tried to get around all of the different townships of Rochdale. So if you're out and about in the borough and want to get a copy, do pop along to those while stocks last, I suppose. The problem with putting things on paper is it always slows down. Jav, I don't know if you wanted to come in there. I'm just going to say, can I just present like share
it's linked to that what you put in the chat.
Okay.
Because it's basically saying asking for a password. Is it just me or is it anyone else getting the same?
It might be that I'll need to edit that at another time, Jav. But let's leave it. If there's a community centre around or nearby you, there's probably got a copy of this newspaper, so pop in and grab it. How we're going to work today is there's a few people here who are involved in the discussions and the interviews. Thanks to Mel and to Paddy, and also to Asghar, who was one of our interviewees, and Nazreen, I think you were another interviewees too, weren't you? So I can't remember if I've prepped for you, but what we're going to kind of do a bit of a chat show and ask a few questions to those people specifically about kind of their views and some of the things they picked up when they were putting this together, and what they're thinking about inequalities, and then kind of open it up and we'll have a discussion collectively with everybody, and in doing so we'll kind of go through some of the different bits and pieces of the magazine. So if you've got questions along the way, if you could put them in the chat or hang on to them for the kind of second half, and then we'll be able to open up to more people and share your thoughts on where we're at with inequalities in Rochdale and the good stuff that happened and the stuff that needs to occur still. So if it's okay to bring in Mel, Paddy, Asghar and Nasreen, I think I might be putting you on a spot a little bit in asking for some of your opinions as well as someone who was interviewed. But the key question I've really got, and then what the newspaper is all about and the front page is all about, it's all about inequalities and how we achieve them. So Mel, you were involved in some of the interviews, conducting and then revising. What do you think about how our attitude to inequalities has changed since the pandemic?
Do you mean basically the authorities as well as like the public, or both? So obviously my opinion would be, I think the government have kind of twigged that we are quite capable of coming together and creating, basically, we all got together, didn't we? And I think the government have noticed this. There's been a lot of, obviously it's helped with the co-production and with collaboration and everything. Sadly, I do think the government have taken a little bit of an advantage of certain people that have for a long time been running community centres and that, and they've kind of gone, oh, brilliant, been sending along people to them, but then obviously like funding's been cut. So I think it's a little bit unfair, but basically I think people's attitudes, it's like just members of the Joe public, you know, they work extremely hard, and they were one of the main people that held it together for us during the pandemic, I think, definitely.
And so do you think recognition of that is staying? How do you feel that gratitude changing over time?
Well, obviously, because certain people have had like funding cut, I think that's a little bit unfair. Personally, I think us members of the public and that we've noticed, and it's like, yeah, praise where it's due. There's a lot of people out there that are working with these charities and whatever else, and they really are. They're incredible people. They give their all to it. So that was my opinion.
Thanks, Mel. That's thank you for sharing. I'm going to come back to you on a few extra points further on, if that's still okay. Yeah, but like Paddy, you're involved in the issues as well. Is there anything you want to add about inequalities from your perspective, or what you see through the Elephants Trail project?
Yeah, sure, Robbie. I'm always happy to pitch in. So for me, right, I think that like we was all aware that inequalities, are massive in our communities and things like that. But I think that the pandemic kind of emphasised some of that. It highlighted some of the issues that we knew was there. It kind of shone a spotlight upon them, and it gave us a bit of an opportunity to focus on some of them issues, probably a little bit more in depth with a little bit more resource than we had before. Look, for example, we're having this conversation, aren't we? We was able to pull together everyone. We was able to pull together people from the grassroots organisations, decision makers, people from the community, people with lived experience, and we all sat around the same table. The pandemic was something which was kind of a bit of a catalyst for that. And I believe that in many respects, we was able to start getting things done. So I think that we have a greater awareness around some of the inequalities than we probably had previously to the pandemic. I believe that there's a willingness to address that more so. I believe that people have been working together in a much more collaborated way, which has been really, really helpful and really good to see. I believe that people have been quite motivated. We have to be careful that doesn't, that momentum doesn't dissipate over time. But yeah, I mean, like I would say that there's been an improvement in attitude towards some of this stuff. I think that we address things a lot more realistically. So I believe that we've been breaking down certain stigmas, certain barriers and things like that over time. I believe, like, because I just recall, like, there's someone here who we did an interview with who was part of the Equalities Assembly work. It was our Naz. She gave us a cracking interview. She always does. You know, she's I'm always like motivated, encouraged, and challenged by the things that our Naz says. And I remember her telling us about how they was able to go out and start addressing some of the stigma regarding mental health in her communities and things like that. So, like, I believe that there's been some progress made, you know, in some respects, but I believe that there's still more to be done in terms of our attitude towards this stuff.
Yeah, thanks, Paddy. It's interesting what you're saying. It's putting me in mind of a kind of idea that you can't resolve something until you acknowledge that it's there. But I suppose it's also that acknowledging that this is a challenge and this is a difficulty doesn't mean we've resolved it at all. There's a lot of work still involved. So the attitude is a really important first step, but it's not all of it. Asghar, I wonder if I can bring you in, and you were kind of interviewed as one of the like organisations connected to the grassroots, anchoring one of those communities in Scotland where you have a community centre. How do you think equalities have changed since the pandemic?
Since I received your email to come onto this, I've been thinking about this. I don't want to answer everything in one fell swoop. So so I've been thinking about, if we can go to the very beginning of the pandemic. I think what's been highlighted for me and what stood out for me the most, I don't, like I said, you may come back to me for other things, so I don't want to do a huge answer, but what stood out for myself, the community centre and the community at large, was the fact that, and we work towards helping or trying to strive or trying to break down barriers and inequalities, but the pandemic itself, right at the very beginning, I think hit the minority ethnic community really hard, and it was all over the media, it was all over the press. If you are of a certain age, if you are of a certain background, you are more at risk. And I think that sticks out for me the most, and that it almost like frightened the life out of clients. We had I know it was lockdown, and even when lockdown started to sort of disappear, people were just frightened to sort of even step into a building. So I think the inequalities that were already there were highlighted even greater, because you'd see it, you know, Asian doctors have lost their lives and on the front line, or nurses, etc. And I think that's the feedback I got from my community, who I sort of serve in the Scotland area, just frightened the life out of them. And these inequalities, and I'm going right at the very beginning of the pandemic, not when we started to realise about the, you know, about getting your jabs, and, you know, things may not have been as bad as what it. So I wanted to just sort of highlight that the inequalities that were already there, and are still there, but we're just sort of times 1,000, I think, since COVID hit. And I think Mel mentioned about, you know, funding cuts and things like that. I mean, they're that's another point, but, you know, we know this is why we're here, to serve these inequalities, but it's that sticks out for me, and when I speak to people, about how the minority ethnic communities were hit.
And I think that perspective really. So I'm looking at page 2 of the newspaper, and the cracks revealed beneath article. And I think that perspective was shared with us from a number of different corners, and indeed in the network meetings that we discussed. Because within this, we're talking, you know, like, I think the conclusion we kind of came to is it's anyone whose experience isn't exactly the majority. So we heard people talk about, you know, different ethnic groups, and actually minorities within them. So Kashmiri women was one that we mentioned, and one that was mentioned to us. That's a different experience to being Kashmiri, and it's a different experience to be a woman as well, and that doubles up the difficulties, but also older people and the fear they faced came through really strongly in some of the network meetings in particular, I remember, as did the challenges for younger people and those kind of stages of life that they were going through and they missed out on. But also the fear of what might happen and where it might come, hitting different people differently. And I think that was a really strong one. I'm just looking as well over on the other page. So on the inside cover of this, we've got a quote there, and we didn't want to attribute any of the quotes to anyone because it felt like a kind of collective. But I feel this one about Rochdale, or a family that has meals together works better, came through as a really powerful one. And I can say the person who said that is not on the call today, so I feel comfortable in picking out that one. And what we liked about it is obviously not just talking specifically about food. It's talking about spending time doing the kind of essential things that you have to do in the same page, and it works better because there aren't secrets that can then be held. People are in the same places and are in the same spaces as each other, and they understand the different ways they all work and then can navigate the difficulty. And it was that kind of vibe of cooperation and sitting down together to do something that seemed to come through really strongly, and we wanted to highlight it on the inside cover. But we also wanted to ask the question that's on that page about whether Rochdale does have meals together and so understands how each other works. And Nazreen, I'm wondering if I can put you on the spot and ask your opinion on that. To what extent do you think Rochdale as a borough and as different communities achieves that kind of goal of having meals together now versus before the pandemic?
It's a big question, and it's a difficult one to answer because I can talk for the communities I engage with. There's so many people who live in Rochdale, and it's so diverse. Within some traditional cultures, eating a meal together is a given, which was immediately taken away during COVID. That happened to all of us. And we are sharing a meal together. We share our dishes together. We share. I think that was picked up as well in media of how the Asian communities do share your utensils. And I found that when I heard it, it was really weird. Think, oh, do we do that? We actually do that. We're having a glass of water and somebody stood next to me, my son, my mother, father, whatever. God rest their soul. We wouldn't think twice about it. But something as tiny as that to be picked up and seen as, this is bad, this is wrong. It kind of makes you question your own traditions. You think, are we wrong? So that's just one thing. But as a general, I think we are, as a community, trying our level best to come together. But there's resources which are always limited for us. It's very limited. But in households now, we see it. I saw it, during the Jubilee. We had some massive gathering where food was available for everybody. Each, communities from all walks of life came because it's a meal, it's food. It unites people together. It brings people together. Eating in front of somebody is a very personal, intimate thing. If you really look into it, it's not something. I know of many friends who would probably go out but won't eat a meal in front of their beloved, or it's just not right. But to have that, I don't think people realize how much of an intimate moment you are sharing with each other. So it's a beautiful thing what is happening, but there's so much more to do now. People are very scared, very frightened. COVID hasn't disappeared. People just aren't talking about it. People are living with so many symptoms of COVID, and there are so many people who are still unable to share a meal together. But as a whole, it is food that always brings us together. No matter what happens, food is always going to bring us together. And food is something that is a token of kindness, a token of gesture. It's for us, for in our communities, we would have whatever surplus food we had, and we'd knock on our neighbour's door just to hand it over, no questions asked. We'd open back gates and leave food over because we know pride is such a big thing in our community. So food is always a way in. It's an anchor somehow. So on that particular subject of food, I think that's the only thing that's always going to bring us together. It's human need. We can't survive without it. And with that, by default, comes the human company. And that's the golden nugget. And that's what we're missing. That's what's been highlighted during COVID. But I just want to say, though, and I think it's important to say this, once this conversation started, I was observing my body. I was feeling very tense. I felt very emotional. when I think Asghar mentioned the seniors and the struggles we had during COVID. I felt I was reliving moments, and I talked myself out of stop. I can find myself going into it's like this uncharted territory, conversations that haven't been had, suppressed traumas there. And it comes up sometimes. And I think it's important to mention that when we are reflecting, reflection in itself is very emotional, and it's not easy. So I want to end on this. We have proven to be the fourth emergency response sector, and we should be recognized for that in our community, because we came together. No matter what happens, our spirits came together, we carried on, and we still do. So when we highlight our journeys, our learnings, our challenges, we also need to highlight, God damn, the strength we had to get through it. I still stand and still carry on. I still have that, not to give up, carry on. You fall, but fall forward. Don't fall backwards. And that's what we're good at doing, to keep picking up each other. And I think Rochdale has a knack for that. Not any other borough has that. That's my personal biased opinion. I'm going to end it at that, Robin.
Here. I've seen lots of support for that rallying call as well, Nazreen. And Paddy, you want to come in on this kind of question of shared experiences?
Yeah, well, sort of. It was just, it was around this, a family that eats together, works better. That's the quote, I think, in it off the top of my head. I just totally agree with what Naz was saying. Like I said, she always fires me up. She always motivates me, and that, I wasn't lying, was I? So I agree with that completely. I mean, for me, on a personal note, even with my parents and stuff like that, I've been noticing that they've been getting a little bit frail, a little bit older, and I've just been thinking, I want to invest some time with them. Do you know, I want to sit down with them and stuff. So I've been going up and I've been sharing a meal with them. Do you know what I mean? Because that is a really good time to kind of sit down and talk and things like that, isn't it? And ultimately, what that metaphor says to me is it's about investing in relationships, isn't it? It's about actually getting to know one another. It's about sitting down and actually getting to a point, like Naz said, where we can talk about these difficult things, where we can be honest, where we can be open about some of this stuff, and we can lay it all out there, knowing that, we're all kind of on the same page, and I think ultimately when you invest in one another, when you invest time into one another, and I don't mean that it's necessarily just in a working capacity, there's kind of a social element to it as well, isn't there, that goes beyond work, about knowing a person and who they are. I think when you actually establish good connections, real solid connections with people, you're able to establish trust, and you're able to know them people that you're working with and that you're going and sharing spaces with. And that ultimately is just a healthy thing all around, isn't it? Because if there's something which, I might not be really comfortable with addressing, I might know somebody down the road who's got a lot more expertise in that area, because we sit down, we talk together. Do you know what I mean? We get on, and I would totally trust that person to take up this issue, or to direct you to that person. So I think that I believe that through COVID, I believe that we actually started going and sharing a lot more spaces together. I got invited into a lot of spaces that I never was, that I was never offered into before. And I believe that it was a similar thing for lots of other people. So I believe that we actually do know each other a little bit better. I believe we've come a long way in that respect. But likewise, like I said, it's about keeping that momentum up, isn't it? It's about continuing to do that stuff, and it's about continuing to invest in our relationships.
Thanks, Paddy. And I mean, some of the things you're talking about there, those connections, they are precisely the things that we identified and pulled out as the gems. I think we described them as the local jewels forged during the pandemic that we should treasure. And a lot of them, I'm just looking at them now. Camarado stuff, the carers stuff that Amy's obviously involved in, who's on here today. Some of the kind of checking in and supporting people, or creating safe spaces for people who've been in difficult situations. They're all about investing in relationships and creating those relationships. And I think it's right that we recognise the traumas that are still there, like you say, the deeply held emotions, and the inequalities that still exist, while drawing optimism from the good stuff that happened. And Asghar, I wonder if I can bring you back in, and maybe this is some of the stuff that you wanted to keep in your pocket to share, and ask what gives you optimism about our ability to tackle the inequalities that still exist.
I think learning from what Paddy, what Paddy just said, learning from what happened during the pandemic. If people working together, I think what I can only speak for the community I sort of serve, and what gives me confidence going forward is just the communities coming together and how well we gelled, how well we worked together on various projects. It wasn't necessarily about it might have been food, it might have been other stuff, but just literally watching and seeing people dropping off medicines and so it's just that whereas sometimes to get even 10 people together in a room is difficult, but the way the local community gathered and worked together, I just hope that can continue regardless of pandemic or no pandemic. So that's what gives us confidence going forward. I also wanted to I think a lot of people are much more and this is a positive as well, a lot of people are more aware about health issues as well, and I think that sort of came out of the pandemic as well, where ordinarily they wouldn't, for example, if I can give you an example, a group of Pakistani women who may not want to walk down the street for whatever reason, whatever the cultural reasons are, in a group. Now it's they're doing that 4 times a week now because it was recognised that COVID was linked to health, etc. So it's those kind of initiatives, it's those kind of small changes. I know some people have been doing that for years anyway. However, the community I sort of serve and some of the feedback we're getting, I'm just hoping some of these positives can continue. But yeah, I think that just generally the community coming together, if we can go forward with that mindset, I think it's win-win for everybody.
That's really exciting, and I'm really interested in the areas of focus that people are now thinking about and are now at the forefront of what they want to devote their time to. So like you say about the kind of the health thing being what that group of women wants to talk about, not just that attitude of feeling like they can do it. I wonder if prior to the pandemic they wouldn't have been thinking about the health aspects, they would have thought about another aspect of their lives. We'll have to see how that pans out in time. Nazreen,
Yes, I just wanted to come in, if I may, just onto the back of what Asghar said, is my experiences of how I think what has highlighted the initiatives that's taken place that need to continue. So I was supported to develop a suicide awareness training course, and it was specifically in mind of my own experiences and my community experiences, which until this day people just don't want to openly talk about. And I think it's important to throw the number as well. Just want to say this, it's good to share. We had a suicide vigil day as well recently, where they highlighted that in our borough alone in Rochdale, within this year up until September, there's 33 lives that were taken by suicide. And those are the ones that we are aware of. And when I developed this training, it was very intense. It's very difficult to find words for our community without offending anybody, and how to transmit that information rather than just having PowerPoint after PowerPoint. It was very difficult, but we managed to do it. And I can say we delivered 40, 45 ladies. We had conversations which I don't think I would ever been able to have. We had them in very secure, tight-knit locations. We did 10 ladies at a time. And I do believe it was a prevention model for circumstances and challenges that arose within their homes, and how give them a platform to talk, to be acceptable. So under this COVID umbrella, people are comfortably able to talk about depression, suicide, ideation, thoughts, self-harm, where otherwise ordinarily they wouldn't. So that's a massive advantage. It's like a breakthrough. It's the default of COVID, but what a miracle that is to actually start a conversation. It's just a seed, and we can never underestimate the power of the seed because it can flourish. So one of my asks is for us to continue and have the resources available to us to continue those conversations happening, because you can only change with consistency. And my fear is it's highlighted, but the momentum, if we lose the momentum, we'll go back again. So yeah, it's been some fantastic learning as well.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting those things, Nazreen. I do think it's well worth us thinking about the some of the worries and concerns and the negatives. And before we do, I just want to highlight this page in the centre. So I think it's page 6, and the headline is what would a Rochdale that was free and equal look like? Because that's kind of the vision we're aspiring to. And I think through all the interviews we did, and through all of the recommendations and reflections that came out of those original Equalities Assemblies, I think there was a palpable vision, like a real vision of what a fair and equal Rochdale could look like. And it wasn't, it wasn't in a real kind of like materialistic sense of like everybody having an income of over £25,000, or there being there were some really significant like direct things, like there being good transport links between every locality. But the other thing that came out is more about how we existed together. So that's what we put on this page, and that's what we described in these 3 steps that are there. So we tried to pick it out, and there's a bit of a subdescription. But what came through was firstly that things would be organized a bit differently. So the kind of hierarchies and the kind of route between some top decision maker saying let's do this, and it flowing down to everybody, and then just picking up the pieces as it comes out to the people that might need it. The way we would organize it would be much more based on relationships, much more based on people in their communities, and much more focused on some of those conversations to allow interventions to be made before problems get larger and get further away from the people themselves. And that was the bit about how things were organised, and finding people who've gone off the radar, as well as those who are willing to come forward and access the help. And a big bit of that, which is then the second step, is how things are going on are communicated. So how when there's an opportunity available, it's actually shared with all the different communities that are out there, and using different methods to get different audiences was talked about. And I think we included that because it felt like that happened a lot more during the pandemic. And some of the stuff Asghar and Nazreen you've talked about with different communities being particularly affected, and knowing that therefore if we wanted to get the vaccine to them or something else, you needed to use specific communication methods to tell people that something's there, otherwise it would just be forgotten. And then finally, one of the most important points of how things are paid for, that I think a few people have brought up about, if it's not resourced to happen, then, and there's not consistency in it happening, then it's not going to be possible. And that's something we all know so well. You say we're the 4th emergency service, Nazreen, the community and voluntary sector, but we've not got a national insurance contribution coming to those things that you're all doing every day. And we know that the public sector doesn't get enough funding to do its own thing as well. So being able to pay for things and then measure and monitor them, not through kind of transactional targets of, okay, here's 20 quid, can you go and deliver 5 mental health interventions, but actually kind of what do you need to be there for the conversations that need to happen, and okay, let's go and find that. Not necessarily people competing with each other for a small pot of money, but being able to collaboratively say, okay, well, we need this bit for yours and you need that, and we've got this much, so how can we balance it effectively? And that was the vision that came out, and I don't think we're there yet at all. But it's maybe, I'm not going to put this to anyone, but it's a moment of reflection, like how far off that vision are we? Are we closer now than before the pandemic? And what would get us, if we're 60% of the way, what would get us 65% of the way in the next year? Because we've got another, obviously, crises coming right at us, and they can be a way to advance towards our vision. So I'd really call on everyone to take a look back at that again and think about what gets us closer. But there were some difficulties, and there were some things to be concerned about, and there were some things that I think we picked up from a lot of people. There was the possibility of slipping back towards the way things were that we didn't like before the pandemic, away from the things that were changing. And I'm really interested to know from our speakers, and then maybe that's when we open up to other people. What are you worried might slip back? And Mel, you're coming at it from the point of view of being involved in the Elephants Trail, and you talked about that kind of cooperation and that different way of doing things, which is fantastic. From your perspective, what are you most worried might slip back to how it used to be?
Obviously, I feel that with us all, with the collaboration, us, you know, working with authorities and that, and obviously getting our voices out there, it feels that maybe we're kind of making the inequalities, or the people that are suffering that, we're kind of there to make their voice heard. The fact is, and yeah, people that slip through the net, I think we're, with us being like, you know, just the, like, doing the collaboration with people and that, we've got more of that level of understanding and being able to know where we're not sat behind a big desk or on a fancy chair, if you know what I mean. We're out there, we see it a lot more than people that are in authorities. Not disrespecting them. The fear of the fact is, what if it was to go back where we didn't have this co-production at the level it is now, there will be people that won't even get noticed or even heard about, and they will slip through the net, and that can cause a lot of deaths from many angles. So that would be my fear, yeah. Because, I mean, like you said, we're not at a level where we would be 100% like breathe, far from it, but we're a lot better than what we were before. And it's quite frightening to think there was people that were suffering and nobody in authority or anything, there was just nobody taking notice of them. They were just stuck out there, not knowing what to do, who to turn to. And I think, yeah, that would be a scary thought. A very scary thought.
I can hear that. It's kind of, you know, we've started no longer thinking it's acceptable for people to fall through the net. And if we go back to thinking, oh, it's all right, as long as we do something that's okay for the 60% of people that, you know, look or sound probably like me, actually, then that'll do. But actually, if it doesn't reach all the other people who are in different situations, that's not okay, and that's something to keep hold of, isn't it? I
must admit, even for myself, I've learned the fact that, you know, the people that are obviously like the addicts and alcoholics in their kind of world, there's a lot of suffering, a lot of bullying. There's a lot of things go on that we possibly don't even know about. And my eyes have been quite open to that recently, and I'm quite shocked. You can't just let these people and judge them or whatever. They need support, they need rallying around, they need people around them. Yeah, sadly, let's hope we can have a perfect world.
Indeed. Paddy, there's some thoughts on this you want to share?
Yeah, I'll try and share them. Is my internet all right? Like, everything's a little bit jumpy, like I'm only catching snippets of it. Can you hear me loud and clear? Yeah.
You're coming through fine, yeah.
Okay. So, like, a big one for me, and Mel's already touched on it before, you know, she already threw this one out there right at the start, is like the funding aspect of it. Because, like, one thing that like happened when the pandemic hit was there was loads of resources that became available. For most people, now I'm aware that it wasn't the same for everyone. But I know that, like, there was access to certain resources, certain finances and things like that, which wasn't there previously. And I know when we was doing the interviews for the Equalities Assembly, a lot of people was concerned about what was going to happen after the pandemic and if that resource would still be made available. Do you know, especially after they took on all this work, and not only had they took on the work, they was finding that the workload was increasing as well. Do you know, so a big concern at the time was around the resources. Now I'm actually aware that I feel like from my understanding, a lot of that resource has been pulled back, a lot of it has been stripped back. So that's one area that causes concern. Another one is just like, I mean, we're talking about the pulling together and stuff like that. We're talking about, you know, sitting at a table together. But I've gone to quite a few network meetings where, like, when COVID was happening, there was like an energy around it, wasn't there? And people were fired up and people were there and everyone was contributing. And I just hope that, like, that, because there's some network meetings I've been going to where the attendance has been dwindling and things like that, and people aren't, you know, possibly aren't connecting as they was previously. Also, I mean, like, there's a page when I was looking at the Equalities Assembly paper, there was an article where it was talking about purpose being the new profit, and I think that a lot of people had like a genuine desire to do something meaningful that blessed other people, didn't he, at that time? Do you know, like you'd see people going, like getting shopping for the elderly and things like that, and sitting with people, teaching them how to use technology if they didn't know how to use technology and stuff. And there was a real kind of sincere desire to like help one another. And just from my own observations, it feels like that also might be dwindling a little bit. You know, so that's why I think like things like this are important, just to remind us, just to you know, keep talking about this kind of stuff to try and motivate us.
Thanks, Paddy. That actually brings really well on to the final question I want to ask, and maybe I'll put this to you, Asghar, and to Nazreen, before opening up to everybody. Is at the end of the paper, we've got our cut out and keep section. So our real kind of like, here's the ones to remember. One of which was identified was, if we can do it for COVID, we can do it for everything else. It was that same message that you shared earlier, Nazreen, of like, we did do this, and that should fortify us, and that should stay with us. And the other one, to basically maintain that level of cooperation. So put down your lanyards specifically, was I think what people were saying to us. You know, there's badges that we wear around our neck that say, I'm this organisation and you're that organisation, and instead recognise that we all work for Rochdale, we all work for the borough and the people that are here, and that's what we're all doing, what we're doing for them. But Asghar and Nazreen, like, what would your big cut out and keeps be from your experiences around inequalities over the pandemic?
Do you mean Asghar, go on?
You're there, Nazreen.
Yeah, so for me, it'll be relationships. The biggest takeaway for me is relationships. And I just want to touch upon what Patrick said as well. It's very important. I think we mentioned this. One of the key things I fear, and I feel it as well, that is happening over the pandemic, we were all very emotional, very vulnerable. We all kind of gelled and connected and formed remarkable relationships, remarkable understanding. When you hit rock bottom together, the only way is up. When you grow together, you're on the same level. So when I mean by relationships, we have over time built relationships with decision makers, with seniors, and then slowly moved off to other jobs. And those people who are in their place, it's like we're reliving us, we're re-establishing, we're trying to rebuild again. So it's sometimes taking one step back rather than a step forward. But my takeaway is definitely relationships in all levels. I have the privilege to be in company, whether it's online or in person, amongst company I would never have imagined being sat in, never had the privilege of being sat in. And for that, I think that's one of the massive highlights and gems that for once, we're all on equal par. For once, it didn't matter what, you know, where you sat, who you were, we all connected because we all felt it was an overwhelming desire to connect with another human. So yeah, my takeaway is relationships, and I hope God become stronger and forever. So that's definitely a big one.
Thank you, Nazreen. Asghar, you reckon can you sum it up in one sentence of what you want people to remember?
I was just thinking my takeaway would be fish chips and mushy peas. I'm just sorry, I was just getting hungry. I think services available out there. Sorry, I do apologise. Services available out there would be my takeaway, because I think cut out and keep, because I think a lot of people weren't aware of some of the. When I talk, I only talk from my clients or service users' point of view, not necessarily my own. But what services were available out there? I mean, a lot of people just think there's I'm not being disrespectful, but people, they know there's a job centre there, and they know there's a huge building which is called the council. But you've got to drill down and tell people that there are different services available, specific services, you know, for mental health, etc., etc. So I think services available. What came forward for me was what is actually out there, and hopefully, you know, depending on these services, depending on these organisations, if they can still, I know it's all funding dependent, but just letting people know that there's a vast array of services available. Don't just think, you know, I can't find X, Y, Z, and that's it, and you've got to stay at home. So I suppose it links with sort of isolation as well. So just get out there, and there are services available out there.
Thank you, Asghar, and well, yeah, thank you everyone for your contributions. I want to open it up in the time remaining to anyone who wants to share their perspectives on any of the questions we've asked today, or or things that stood out to you from the paper and from your experiences during the pandemic. So whether those are the positive things that give you optimism to address the stuff still there, things you're worried might slip back, the things you think have changed about how we view inequalities, or the real big kind of cut out and keeps for you. Would anyone particularly like to come in and share your thoughts? Jav, you've shared a few things in the chat. I'm wondering whether you could share them out loud and some of your experience.
No, one thing, because I've been in the voluntary sector for a considerable amount of time, and I would say COVID made us like gel together, because like there was a lot of small organizations, etc. there, but people didn't know we weren't as connected. But now I think we're a big workforce, like, sorry, stupid phone. And that's what's made, that's what's making Rochdale stronger. And if you look at when Amal came to Rochdale, if you saw the diversity of the community, and there was no space to actually put any more people there. That's how crowded it was. So, the spirit of being connected in Rochdale, it's always been there, but it came up more in the COVID in terms of the voluntary sector, because we're at the grassroots, we see it, and we can react a lot quicker than large organizations. We don't need any extra policies. It's a matter of open the door, go and deal with it. And I think that's the key difference. And Nasreen mentioned something in the previous meeting, like we are the fourth emergency service. And other services can't reach where we've got that reach. I want to stop before I continue.
That's a really powerful contributions, Jav. And just to confirm, Amal was the giant puppet, drawing attention to refugees and people seeking sanctuary, right? Which is a lovely project and initiative.
You couldn't move. It was amazing.
Yeah, thanks. Is there anyone else who'd want to share a comment or reflection? Nichelle, come in.
Yeah, just for me, because I wasn't working in this sector during the pandemic, so this, the Equalities Assembly paper that you've put together feels like a really strong learning tool for what's about to come or is now upon us with the cost of living crisis, because it feels quite similar in a lot of ways. And I guess a kind of a reflection is that, or a worry that I might have is, how do we get those people to come forward again and support the people who are going to struggle through the winter now? That huge influx of volunteers that came from everywhere, all across the borough, from all walks of life. Do we think that those people are going to come again to support the people that are going to need, I'm going to need people to distribute food, to give advice, to be available for crisis talks, to signpost people. So I think we'll be looking at a lot of the learnings from this piece of work to how we operate over the next couple of months.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I remember, just to share kind of one of my reflections, thinking, well, this is going to change everything. We're not going to look at the world and how we all work together again now, because we've all been through this completely different experience. And if I went out and around now, does that feel exactly the same? Probably not. But there's challenges coming down the road. Have we changed them permanently? I don't know. I think we've got some memory of how we can do it. So maybe with the next crisis, we don't have to learn that for the first time. We can implement it. I think that's kind of my hope. Helen, I've seen you come off mute. I'm wondering whether you wanted to share some of your professional and personal experiences, maybe.
Yeah, I can't get my reactions to work, so I'm glad you spotted that. And with my hat on as Rochdale Council, and for those of you who don't know me and haven't met me before, I'm a policy advisor for Rochdale Council, but I'm also involved with the third sector because I am a parent carer. So I'll talk with both hats on. So starting with the council, myself and Nicola, who's also a policy advisor, are both on the session today. I would say that from an optimistic point of view, from the council's perspective, I do feel we've established really good relationships with the voluntary sector that were not there prior, or certainly we're not as well established prior to the pandemic. Certainly, you know, there's a number of people on this session that I know now and that I see with a variety of hats on, and that can only be a good thing. And I know, speaking from myself and Nicola's point of view, we very firmly believe in seeking out the voices of people with lived experience, and we do try and do that as much as we possibly can, and that will you know, hopefully lead to a culture shift. And there's not only us. I think the pandemic showed people at the council that what we need is input from people in the voluntary sector, because as somebody very well pointed out before, I made a note of it, you are there working with the communities and we're not. And you know, that helps to stop people falling through the net. So there are some things that make me feel heartened in terms of my position as a council officer. With my hat on as somebody who works with carers and people with disabilities, obviously I share some of the same frustrations in terms of fears about funding and things like that. I think that's a common thing. But yeah, I do think you know, there has been a unity and a community brought about because of the pandemic. There are good things that we need to seize on. The coming months will prove to be a challenge again, and hopefully you know, we can continue to build on what we established during the pandemic. And we, well, speaking for myself personally as a council officer, massively value the input of the voluntary sector in terms of the work that we do, and I do hope that we have a strong partnership moving forward, that we continue to build on that. So yeah, it's good.
And thanks, Helen. We really, and you know, appreciate that perspective as well. It's a big part of the partnership. All the people in those different positions, connected in different ways, coming together. So we're nearing 2 o'clock. At which point I think we, you know, will promptly kind of draw to a close. I think thank you everyone for sharing lots of brilliant reflections. Would anyone like to have a final word? And that includes Mel, Paddy, Nazreen, Asghar. Anything to take away on?
I'd like to just say thank you. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you for giving us a safe space to share our feelings. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to be valued as valuable members in the community. And Helen Watson, I thank you personally for thanking the voluntary sector. It's nice to be thanked personally by somebody from the council. And yeah, so thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I just want to second that as well. It's been an absolute joy to be, you know, a part of this work. I was fortunate enough to, you know, be present at the majority of the interviews, and I learned an absolutely incredible amount. And I believe that it opened my eyes to a lot of the things that was going on, and I feel a lot more kind of aware about certain things. Especially, I think it will help my work going forward, and I feel a lot more informed for it. And I actually really felt quite motivated by, like, you know, some of the inspirational characters that I got to meet by being able to be a part of this work. It was definitely a team effort. Everyone pulled together, and I just hope that we can, you know, we can take some of the stuff that we've learned and utilize it going forward, you know. So yeah, just big thanks to everyone involved.
Here. I think that's a great point to end on. So I'm just going to share again. I've updated the link, so where you can find the Equalities Assembly online, and where you can see the physical locations that hopefully still have some copies, and to encourage everyone to keep, you know, some of these relationships going and put that energy into networks. You can find out about the ones that Action Together are managing in Rochdale through the link in the chat there now. across a number of different themes and places as well. So please do keep connecting. Those aren't the only ones. There are plenty more out there. Please do keep eating together. Please do keep understanding how everyone works, and we'll keep working to make Rochdale more equal and more fair. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.